Well, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. It is so wonderful to be here with you today. I'd like to give a big shout out to my new subscribers. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is Readings with Regina, and I am Regina. And I want to remind you that I've created this series because I really want people to start an after school or a Saturday class with their children. Absolutely. Stop acting like when you send your children to school, I don't care what school you send them to, okay? Ghetto schools, regular schools, elite schools. If those schools are in this country, you are not going to learn. If you are of African descent, if you are obviously a Black person, you're not going to get a full history of your people. And so that's the basic purpose of why I created Readings with Regina, because I want you to know, in particular, the foundational literature that our people wrote under the worst circumstances imaginable: slavery, bondage in America. And they wrote that literature because they wanted you of today to know your story, because your story is their story. So, this video is entitled The Lassoed Man. That was Charles Ball. Remember him? The brother who came out of the store and was lassoed by a group of white men because he was about to be resold to other buyers of enslaved people. So he was a lassoed man. And I certainly hope you remember Blake or Henry, because he is the first Black nationalist freedom fighter in literature to be written by a Black man. And this Black man happened not to be enslaved. He was a free Black, Martin Delany, because his mother had been free. And the status of the child depended upon the status of the mother during our enslavement. So he wrote Blake, and we're going to pay attention. I'm going to point out different words that he uses that are quite modern. And this book, Blake, which I'll get to later, was written in the 1860s. But first, I want to start with this book, The Half Has Never Been Told. And, you know, that title is so key. Why is that title key? Because it is the half that has never been told. Slavery and the making of American capitalism. So understand that we all live in America under a capitalistic system. And this book ties in how slavery was a major component for the making of the system of capitalism that we even have today. Rarely is that acknowledged. So I'm going to get right into it. And again, if you have any questions or comments, just put them below and I will try to address them. And let me just say this to you too, because a couple of you have done this. If you have questions for me that you really don't want to put in the comments for whatever reason, that's cool. Then I want you to go to, let me get it here. Go to my website. There's a form on my website where you can get in touch with me and you can ask any questions that you might have about this series, or even any questions that you might have about specific language, specific words, specific concepts that I talk about. Okay? So do feel free to go to my website, fill out the form that will take you right to my email address. All right. So I'm reading from The Half Has Never Been Told, and we're starting again with Charles Ball, who was the lassoed man. As Charles sat mute and bound in the bow of a rowboat that had been hired to take him across the Patuxent River from Ballard's Landing, Charles Ball already knew his fate. The way enslaved African Americans talked about Georgia and Georgia men was their way of describing the new economic, social, and political realities that were destroying the world they had built in the Chesapeake. Yet 20 years of fearing the Georgia men did not make the instantaneous demolition of his family and future any easier. And while he had always feared the slave trade, Ball was beginning to realize that the Georgia man who faced him across the body of the sweating oarsman was building a machine even more cunning than he had imagined. Now, as they neared the other side, Ball saw a group of African Americans huddled on the bank. They were his 51 fellow captives. 19 women were linked together by a rope tied to the cord halters that encircled their necks. 32 men were in a different situation, and Ball was about to be joined to them. A blacksmith waited with iron for him, iron collar, manacles, chains. The buyer cut loose the right cords around Ball's wrists. Ball stood indifferent to his fate, as he later remembered, while the two white men fitted the collar on his neck and slid the hasp of an open brass padlock through a latch in the front. Then they passed a heavy chain inside of the curve of metal and pushed the hasp and the body of the padlock together. Click. The same heavy iron stringer now joined Ball to the other 32 men, sliding like fish strung through the gills. Then, for the last step in the process, the blacksmith took two hands of iron, put them around Ball's wrists, and pounded down bolts to fasten the manacles. He attached the manacle on Ball's right wrist by a short chain to the left manacle of the next man on the neck chain. The two of them would have to walk in step and next to each other. Ball was now becoming one moving part of something called a coffle, an African term derived from the Arabic word kafila, a chained slave caravan. The hammer pounded hard, and the bolt pinched the wrist of Ball's chainmate, who began to cry. Ball sat stoically, but on the inside, his emotions ran just as wild. His mind raced uncontrolled from, quote, the suffering that awaited, end of quote, him in a place that he believed had long since killed his mother, to even more despairing internal sentences. I wish I had never been born. I want to die. I cannot even kill myself because of these chains. They waited on the bank. The blacksmith yawned. By the time a flat bottomed boat approached the bank, Ball's heart had stopped racing. I concluded, he said, as an old man, telescoping a recovery in reality more painfully won, that as things could not become worse, and as the life of a man is but a continued round of changes, they must, of necessity, take a turn in my favor at some future day. I found relief in this vague and indefinite hope. In the boat was the returning Georgia man, who ordered them all on board. The women, Ball now noticed that a couple of them were obviously pregnant, and the 16 pairs of men plus one clambered in with a chorus of clinking. The scow set off toward the south bank of the Patuxent. That's the river. The slave rowers pulled. Probably they didn't sing this song, but one white traveler heard Chesapeake watermen chanting, "Going away to Georgia, ho, heave, ho. Massa sell poor Negro, ho, heave, ho. Leave poor wife and children, ho, heave, ho." A man or woman who discovered that he was being taken south might be desperate enough to do anything. Some ran, some fought like tigers. William Grimes tried to break his own leg with an axe. No wonder sellers and buyers schemed to take men like Charles Ball unawares. And once buyers bought, no wonder they bolted fetters on men and ran links of iron through padlocks. Men could march together, carrying their chains, but there was no way that they could all run together. There was no way they could leap off a boat and swim to shore. No way 33 men hauling 1,000 pounds of iron could hide silent in the woods. The coffle chains enabled Georgia men to turn feet against hearts, to make enslaved people work directly against their own love of self, children, spouses, of the world, of freedom, and hope. When the scow scraped bottom in the shallows on the other side of the river, and the people awkwardly staggered out, the Georgia man led them up the bank and onto a road that they walked until evening fell, heading southwest. They stopped at a rough tavern. The proprietor put them in one large room. 52 pairs of mostly manacled hands managed to share a large pot of corn meal mush before it was too dark to see. And if you recall in Fred Douglass's narrative, when he was talking about the children, how they were fed. Now they were fed in a trowel. A trowel is what horses eat out of. A trowel is what pigs eat out of. Well, the enslaved children in Fred Douglass's narrative ate out of the trowel, and they ate mush. So here we see mush again. That night, Ball nestled between the two men chained closest to him. He laid awake for many hours. When at last he slept, his son came to him. In Ball's dream, the little boy tried to break the chain between his father's manacles to set his father's hands free so that he could fix the boy's broken world. Beautifully written. But the iron held. Charles' son faded. Then Charles's grandfather appeared. His grandfather had been born in Africa in the 1720s. He'd been kidnapped as a teenager and sold to men who brought him across the salt water to Maryland. There they renamed him. And by the time Charles had known him, old Ben was gray with half a century in slavery. Ben never surrendered his own version of Islam or his contempt for either the enslavers or the enslaved people who behaved submissively. Charles's father, in contrast, had tried to play a less defiant part. But after the 1785 sale of his wife and children, the father changed. He spent his free time at Old Ben's hut talking about Africa and the wrongs of slavery. The owner grew worried that the younger man would run away. He arranged a posse to help seize Charles's father for a Georgia trader. But old Ben overheard two white men talking about the plan. He crossed 3 miles of woods in the dark to Charles's father's cabin, handing his son a bag of dried corn and a jug of cider. Ben sent him off toward Pennsylvania. No one in Calvert County ever heard from Charles's father again. Ben would have come for his grandson too, but the old man was dead, 10 years gone. And these locks and chains would have defeated even his survivor's cunning. When the sun came up, it found Ball stumbling forward, trying to keep time with the rest of the coffle. In the days to come, Ball and the other men gigged on the Georgia man's line, marched steadily southwest, covering 10 to 20 miles a day. The pregnant women complained desperately. The Georgia man rode on. After crossing the Potomac, he moved Ball, who was physically the strongest of the men, from the middle of the chain and attached his padlock collar to the first iron link. With Ball setting a faster pace, the two sets of double lines of people hurried down the high road, a dirt line in the Virginia grain fields that today lies under the track of United States Highway 301. Now I want to show you a picture of a coffle. Now this is a coffle. Now, whoever sketched this picture, the person is anonymous. Okay? The person, how you doing, Mulaney Cole? Right on, sister girl. All right, so look at this coffle, people. Now, this isn't the coffle necessarily that Charles Ball was on, but this is a coffle. Now, check this out. There's the white man on horseback. Understand, people, this is his job. He's being paid for this. These are the kinds of jobs they had in America during the enslavement of African American people. Now, notice this guy, another white guy on horseback, and notice all the way in the distance, another white man on horseback. The brothers and sisters are walking. Notice that they're all chained together. Notice that the men have their hands manacled behind their backs. Notice that. Now, this particular coffle, now this is really blowing my mind. Look, they got a violinist. Do you see him in front? In fact, they got two black violinists so that they could make music. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. While the people walked, they could make music while the people walked. The men were up front. The women are in the back. Do you see that? That is a coffle. And that is the kind of scene that went on in this country as Black people, enslaved people, were moved from one area of America to another. And like Charles Ball, many, if not most, were torn away from their families. They were torn away from their families. They were torn away from their families. And if you remember the story of Charles Ball, when he was lassoed and turned over to the slave drivers, he had asked if he could he asked his master, his previous master, if he could just see his wife and children one more time. No. No. Now, the white men actually did this because they were protecting themselves. Oh, yes. Because you see, if an enslaved man saw his wife or children, I mean, he might do anything. He probably would attack the white men that had him in chains as much as he could. So it was always better, the white people decided, that when a enslaved man or woman was to be sold, they were just to be snatched away without seeing their families. So let me get rid of this and go here. All right, I'm about to read from Blake or The Huts of America. I just love this book. Now, this book, as I mentioned to you before, it's not as cleanly written, especially when it gets to where Delaney was trying to capture in language how enslaved Black people talk. Because you have to remember that most of the enslaved people couldn't read or write. I mean, they were illiterate, and they had created a language based upon English, but it was like a bastardized tongue, you see. So Delaney is trying to capture that, and sometimes I'm trying my best with some of these words, but I'll be explaining what it is that I am reading. And let me just say before I even start that once again, Delaney's work is very important because you get to see a Black man who in fact is the first Black nationalist freedom fighter in literature. That's important. Now, this book was, let's see, it was taken from a series of magazine episodes. There was an Afro American magazine in the 1800s, and some of the literate Black people would publish stories in it, and that's what Delaney did. All right, now the last time I spoke with you about this book, we had let's see. Yeah, there had been a argument between Blake or Henry and his master, Colonel Franks, because Colonel Franks, while Blake was away taking care of business at the races for Colonel Franks sold his wife. The man comes home and his wife is gone. And the Colonel and his wife, Mrs. Franks, had always promised Blake they'd never sell his wife. But what's a promise to a slave? They sold Maggie, okay? And there was an argument. I read that last time. I'm going to pick up on some of that argument now and then go into another area, okay? This is Colonel Franks to Blake. Do you threaten me, sir? Hold your tongue or I'll take your life instantly, you villain. Blake, no, sir. I don't threaten you, Colonel Franks, but I do say that I won't be treated like a dog. You sold my wife away from me after promising that she should be free. And more than that, you sold her. Why? And now you talk about whipping me, shoot me, sell me, or do anything else you please, but don't lay your hands on me, as I will not suffer you to whip me. Running up to his chamber, Colonel Franks seized a revolver. When Mrs. Franks, grasping hold of his arm, exclaimed, Colonel, what does all this mean? Mean, my dear? It's a rebellion, a plot. This is but the shadow of a cloud that's fast gathering around us. I see it plainly. I see it, responded the Colonel, starting down the steps. Now, I just want to stop right here because I need to say this. This is crucial. Enslavers, with all their chains, with all their murderous tendencies, like what Frederick Douglass told us about Mr. Gore, just shooting the enslaved man Denby, shot him dead. And it was all right by the law. There was no law for Black people during Black bondage. White people feared a rebellion. I mean, they really feared. They thought at any minute the enslaved people would just rise up and demolish them. Okay? So that's why the Colonel is saying, it's a rebellion. It's a rebellion. And I mean, this is just him and Henry. But And he sold a man's wife, but he gonna holler, it's a rebellion. Stop, Colonel, admonished his lady. I hope you'll not be rash. For heaven's sake, do not stain your hands in blood. I do not mean to, my dear. I take this for protection. Frank's hastening downstairs when Henry had gone into the back part of the premises. There now, exclaimed Mammy Judy as Henry entered the kitchen. See what this going back down for us? Better put your trust in the Lord, Henry. Ye going clean back to the world. Ye knows it. You're mistaken, Mammy. I do trust the Lord as much as ever, but I now understand him better than I used to. That's all. I don't intend to be made a fool of any longer by false preaching. Henry, interrogated Daddy Joe, who, apprehending difficulties in the case, had managed to get back to the house. Ye gonna lose all your religion. What you doing, boy? Religion? Replied Henry rebukingly. That's always the cry with black people. Tell me nothing about religion. When the very man who hands you the bread at communion has sold your daughter away from you, then you have to defend God. You have to take care, Henry. You have to call on God. I don't intend, unless he does more for me than he has done before in time of need. If ever a man needed God's assistance, I'm sure I need it now. Yeah, don't know what you need. The Lord knows. Just trust in the Lord. I have trusted in him, Daddy Joe, all my life, as I told Mammy Judy this morning. But oh boy, don't talk like that, Henry. Don't talk like that. Going back from my oppressor's religion, if I could only get rid of his inflictions as easily as I can his religion, I would be this day a free man. When you might then talk to me about trusting. This, Henry, this is no way to talk about the Lord. The Lord is of my oppressor's religion, and I don't like it. Mind how you talk, boy. God moves in mysterious ways. His wonders do perform. He moves too slow for me, Daddy Joe. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired. Come, Henry. I have no such talk like that. Ye is just getting too wound up. You getting wicked, boy. Take care. It is not wickedness, Daddy Joe. You don't understand these things at all. Not at all. That's no talk for me, Daddy Joe. I've been standing still long enough. I'll stand still no longer. You must trust in the Lord. With elbows upon his knees and face resting in his palms of his hands, Daddy Joe for some time just shook his head. Never mind, Henry. I hope it will not always be so with you. You have always been kind and faithful to me and the Colonel. This is now Mrs. Franks. She's come in on the conversation. Let's see, where am I? Oh, Mrs. Franks, who having been a concealed spectator of the interview between Henry and the old people, had appeared before them. Oh, Henry, I hope you're not taking to swearing. I do hope you will not give over to wickedness. Our affliction should only make our faith the stronger. Wickedness? Let the righteous correct the wicked and the Christian condemn the sinner? That's uncharitable in you, Henry. This is still Mrs. Franks. As you know, I have always treated you kindly, and God forbid that I should consider myself anything less than a Christian. And I claim as much at least for the Colonel, though, like frail mortals, he is liable to err at times. Madam, said Blake with suppressed emotion, starting back a pace or two. Do you think there is anything either in or out of hell so wicked as that which Colonel Franks has done to my wife and now about to do to me for myself? Henry, said Mrs. Franks, gently placing her hand upon his shoulder. There is yet a hope left for you, and you will be faithful enough, I know, not to implicate any person. It is this: Mrs. Van Winter, a true friend of your race, she must have been an abolitionist, is shortly going to Cuba on a visit, and I will arrange with her to purchase you through an agent on the day of your sale. And by that means, you can get to Cuba, where probably you may be fortunate enough to get the master of your wife to become your purchaser. Now, people, understand what is going on here. White people are the buyers and sellers of Black people. Like, Henry can't just go for his wife himself. Understand that. Because today, you can get on the bus, you can get on the L, you can get in your car, you can do whatever. I can even talk to you, and we're not in the same room. Okay, all of this is remote. But back then, Black people's lives were controlled absolutely, totally by white people. I need you to really grasp that. This is why I read to you these passages, because Martin Delany, back in the 1800s, wanted you to know this. And notice how Martin Delany talks about religion, because he is concerned that Black people are actually accepting the white Christianity that is preached to them by their enslavers. Be good, honor your master, obey, you'll get yours in heaven. So Delany is making a pivotal point that religion, at least the way the religion is being taken in and portrayed by Mammy Judy and Daddy Joe, they are his in-laws. They're his wife's parents. That kind of religion was a holdback. And we will see, as I continue to read Blake, how he becomes detached from religion and then becomes a revolutionary. So it is, of course, it's always a process. Anything in your life is a process. Now, once again, in closing, I will say this. I've created this series because I want you to use it. I want you to learn from it, although it may be difficult. You may not want to, oh, that's so long ago. It's not that long ago. It really isn't that long ago. I have a friend who's 96, okay? And her grandmother had been enslaved. Now, what does that tell you? She's 96. I'll show her book at some point throughout this series. But the point is, and even if it was it was close to 500 years ago. Even if it was that, this is your history that we must reckon with. And if any of these so-called elected officials that were put in office from the blood and the sweat of the revolutionaries during the 1960s and 70s, if they have not honored this history in a way that makes sense to Black people today, y'all ought to think about that. Y'all ought to think about the transition that needs to be done. Slavery, the enslavement of Black people, was big business, and it lasted for centuries. All right, my beloved brothers and sisters, you know that I pray for you every night and every day, because I know that you need prayers, but you need prayers that will commit you to action that will benefit the entire Black race, along with your own personal self. So until next time, which will actually be this coming Thursday at 2:00, I'm going to sign off. It's been good to be with you, and I look forward to seeing you again. Bye now.